Alrighty, guys, welcome back. Earlier, we were discussing Florida State and their plans to break away from the ACC, and now we're going to talk about could the SEC and Big Ten be leaving the NCAA? But before we dive into that, I just wanted to remind you that if you like the show and you want to leave a comment, you can send tips and donations to us at the tips and donation link, which is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. This puts your question at the top of the list so that I can see it, and it also just really helps the show.
Excellent.
So,
All right. So we were on fire when we left
we
right
are
here. Pretty much, you said it best. There was a guy who went to college, and he used to say it all comes down to CSC, and that CSC stands for cash, sweet cash. That's what it comes down to. It's money.
Money, which I guess everybody is concerned about, especially big name companies and everything like that. You know, they want to get
big name schools.
Yeah, get as much money as they can. Alrighty, so could the SEC and Big Ten be leaving the NCAA? Excuse me.
I was going to say, what were you going to call that?
On December 5th, NCAA President Charlie Baker unveiled a somewhat radical proposal to modernize the college athletics model in an unprecedented way, recommending direct pay to athletes and the creation of a new subdivision. The Division I Board of Directors on Thursday charged the Division I Council with developing recommendations for a framework that would address the key elements included in the NCAA President Charlie Baker's Project D1 framework. Any legislative proposals recommended by the council will be brought forward to the board for final consideration. There are three key elements of framework that will be considered independently rather than as a package. Those are including allowing schools to offer enhanced educational benefits at any level they deem appropriate, allowing schools to enter into name, image, and likeness agreements with student athletes, and establishing a subdivision within Division I that would allow higher resource schools to provide additional financial support for college athletes in compliance with the Title IX requirements and create rules that may differ from other programs in Division I. So, essentially what it sounds like is they're trying to give the athletes as much money as possible instead of allowing the school to figure out how much money they want to give their athletes. That's what I got from that. Maybe.
Okay. There's a lot to this. I mean,
Yeah, lot.
I could take this entire segment, the next two segments, and Monday and Tuesday segment on
and
this
talk
one.
about it. Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is anything the NCAA is doing puts out, it's always convoluted. The NCAA, I don't understand how they're thinking here. Something needs to be done. And by what they're proposing is to create a new division, a subdivision, but stay within Title IX. Well, Title IX is make things everyone, whatever the men get, the women should get.
Right.
And I'm all for Title IX. I'm going to make sure you understand before I make my statement. I am 100% for Title IX. But football and the rest of college sports are not on the same playing field. Anything that the women get for volleyball, the men should get, and vice versa. Softball, everything else, with the exception of football. And here is the reason why. As we were talking about the last segment, all the other Olympic sports, they're on par with each other. But football, college football creates billions of dollars. Like we were talking about, just college football alone, Ohio State or even some small school like Rutgers, who isn't really a good football program. They're getting 80 to $100 million a year. That's what their television contract. That's not everything else, but that's their television contract. If you took every sport, men's, women, on campus, it wouldn't come within 1% of that. And that includes college basketball. Football is a different story. And schools are making decisions strictly on doing because of college football money. You look at West Virginia is in the Big 12, and all their schools, I mean, these programs, gymnastics and softball and all these other schools have to play most of their games on in the mountain time zone or in the West Coast because of the fact that West Virginia is chasing bigger dollars by playing in the Big 12. What does Stanford and Cal University have to do with anything with the Atlantic Coast Conference? But this year, they will be in the Atlantic Coast Conference playing all their away games on the East Coast and playing no away games on the West Coast because they want to be part of a major conference. This whole thing, what I'm getting to is these schools are making agreements so that because they're chasing the college football dollars. And so what the NCAA is proposing is that they break out these conferences where the major schools can actually pay their players whatever they want, but the minor schools, such as the Vanderbilts and the Rutgers, would still be in their conference, but not have to pay their players, but they're on a different scale. It's so convoluted what they're proposing that I don't think it will ever fly. What everyone is worried about is that the Big Ten and the ACC's going to come together one day sooner than later and decide that, you know what, these rules that we're governed by isn't working. And they already feel that way. And we're going to break away from the NCAA. And I think the proposal should be Chip Kelly's proposal than what this convoluted thing, what they're trying to do, which is try to do some revenue sharing and things of this nature. Chip Kelly's proposal is you break the college football off from everything else. You put everyone back into NCAA, fall under the NCAA, and make everyone regional. If you're in Georgia, you're playing in that Southeast region. If you're in Rutgers, you're playing in the Northeast region. So it makes it fair. But then for college football is a totally different entity where they bring in a commissioner, that's like the NFL. Players can actually, the schools, a Georgia player makes a contract with Georgia. They get paid XYZ amount of dollars, and they're locked in to play for Georgia, and they're employees of the University of Georgia. That's what should be proposed, so that these schools can now have one conference under one commissioner. All the rules for college football are here. All the other schools have their own set of rules under the NCAA. Now, players, and what I'm saying is, by making them employees, now you don't have the transfer portal being a madhouse, where if you're the starting quarterback for Georgia, you don't have to worry about, hey, after the spring game, someone could come in and offer Georgia's quarterback $2, $3, $4 million, and he's like, hey, I'm transferring, I'm not playing for Georgia this year. You're under contract for the University of Georgia for 4 years or whatever the contract is agreed upon. You're there. It's revenue sharing. It's a collective bargain agreement where they share that, like we were talking about the Big Ten, that 80 to $100 million. The players get to share in this. They get a portion of it. The university gets a portion of it. The players are locked in. They would still be able to do their name, image, and likeness contracts, but they become employees of that university. When you're an employee of that university, you have a paid contract. You get insurance, you get benefits, you get retirement, you get everything. So it benefits the players, it benefits the universities, and football falls under the same rules where there's a commissioner puts in rules for everyone in football. So it's fair and even. But players, the student athlete that's doing gymnastics or volleyball or baseball or lacrosse, they're not being affected because, hey, we want to be in a major conference. So I know we're on the West Coast, but we're going to play on an East Coast conference. And now every school, every player at that university has to suffer. It makes it fair. It makes it so that it's more of a professional type league. Does that make sense, or did I just babble a little bit here? Or both?
Yeah. It makes sense. It seems like college football really like just makes all the decisions for everybody else.
Absolutely.
I don't find that fair. I mean, because
no, it's
obviously
not fair.
College football gets, especially like SEC and Big Ten, they get, you know, a lot of screen time and everybody wants to tune in and watch that. And so, of course, they're worried about how much money these people are going to be getting and that those athletes are taken care of, whatever. But, you know, there's other people in other sports that also like worked hard and do well in their sport, and they're not seeing the same like,
because they're different organizations. They're
Yeah.
different. And here's the thing. You say college football is the one that's running things.
mm-hmm.
It's not college football. You want to know who's running things? It's the networks.
Mm-hmm.
The Pac-12 was the Conference of Champions, a great, strong conference, one of the best conferences in the history of college football. But the Pac-12 is no longer, not because the level of play fell off. The level of play was at the highest it's been maybe ever.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was they didn't have a television contract. And if you don't have a major television contract, everyone's going to leave because that's where the money comes from.
Mm-hmm.
In the last segment, what was the big battle? Florida State wants out of the SEC, the ACC, not because they don't like playing an Atlantic Coast Conference. They have played with Miami and these schools for years and decades. It's because their television contract is way too small and it's not on the level of the SEC and the Big Ten. The SEC and the Big Ten, the reason why everyone is gravitating and everyone wants to go to the ACC and the Big Ten is because everyone is making so much more. You're looking at some schools making $20, $30 million, where Big Ten schools are making 80 to 100 million. That's a massive difference when you're starting to think about having to pay players, pay administrative staff, pay coaches, plus afford to pay for other schools. By breaking it off, I think it protects some of the more, call them Olympic sports, so that Title IX can stay strong. Because what happens as you start, in order to compete, you have to pay more and more. Eventually, there's going to be a bunch of schools that say, you know what? We don't need women's volleyball. We don't need track. We don't need this. Let's get rid of everything and just do football and basketball. That's where it comes from. And the big worry is that the ACC, I mean, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to look at this and say, we're tired of the Big Ten, the NCAA rules, and we're going to break off. We're going to pay our players, and we're going to run this organization the way it should be ran, and we're going to work together and create an organization. And some of these other conferences are worried that if that happens, why would ESPN, why would Fox, why would any of the networks want to pay for an ACC or a Big 12 conference or a Mountain West conference when you have this Super League, Big 10 SEC conference where everyone's watching? These schools would fall apart. They want to be a part of that Big 10 SEC. If that happens, the big worry is for these conferences is just like the ACC. Someone's going to blow up that conference like they did the Big 12 because the top schools are going to run to wanting to be in the SEC and the Big 10, which is what our first segment was about. How to get out of the ACC, break their granted rights so these schools, Miami, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia, can get to the SEC and the Big 10, because everyone is worried about the Big 10 and the AC and the SEC breaking off and all the money going to those schools. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess you don't really hear a lot about like what goes on behind the scenes of all of this, you know?
Yeah, unless you pay attention, a lot of times people don't know this. Think about, were you shocked to find out that the Pac-12 had imploded and gone away, and now all the Pac-12 schools are either in the Big 12 or the Big 10?
Yeah.
USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, these are West Coast schools, are now playing in a Midwest conference, which is known as the Big 10.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's crazy how schools, conferences like the Pac-12 are gone. If Florida State wins their lawsuit and are able to break the granted rights deal, all those schools I mentioned are going to run trying to figure out how to get to either the Big 10 or the SEC. Clemson will end up, and I guarantee you, Clemson will be an SEC school. Florida and Miami, Florida State and Miami will want to be a part of either one of both of those schools will end up in one or the other. They're too big. They have too big of a name to not end up in those schools. But schools like Boston College and Pittsburgh, Syracuse, they're going to end up either out on their own or in the Big 12. ACC will fall apart, just like we just saw with the Big 12, which is kind of sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, did I explain that? Is that a little?
No, yeah.
And I wasn't keeping track of the time, so I don't know if I ran long or if I'm short here.
Money. That's money. That's all.
I'm doing all my hip hop references. Cash rules everything around me. That's cream. So I went CSC and then I went cream.
Well, I guess it'll be interesting to see what happens and what teams are gonna go which way. You know,
it all comes down to, if a judge rules, goes right back to our first segment. This all ties in. These are two separate segments, but they're the same segment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, if a judge in the state of Florida says Florida State is right, this granted rights contract was put together unfairly to the schools, and the schools weren't represented properly, and they have the right to break, all hell's going to break loose, because there's going to be everyone, even the small schools, are going to scramble. No one wants to end up like Oregon State and Washington State, which everyone in the Pac-12 scrambled, and there was two schools left behind with no future, Oregon State and Washington State. If you're an ACC school and you see that contract breaks, and let's say you are a Syracuse or a Pitt, you don't want to sit around and see what's going to happen. You're going to run to the Big 12 and try to get in with the Big 12, because the Big 10 and the SEC just may not take you. Mm-hmm. So everyone's going to, if that contract is broken and everyone can get out of it without paying almost $700 million, everyone's going to scramble to find a landing spot, and that conference will not exist.
Well, I guess we'll have to see what's going to happen. I mean,
see the things you learn on this show here.
Fascinating. Honestly, I think after this, I might go down a rabbit hole of.
Well, as a Georgia, a Georgia student alum, when you look at this, one thing you do realize is that, hey, Georgia's in good shape because you're already in the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
You and Alabama are at the top of the SEC. No one's going to touch you. You don't have to worry about being an Oregon State.
Right.
To show you how bad this is, SMU, Cal, and Stanford, they joined an East Coast conference school, the ACC, which is on verge could blow up.
Mm-hmm.
SMU is saying, like, listen, we want to come to the ACC so bad that we won't take any money at all. Just take us.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep the money.
Mm-hmm.
Cal, Stanford, like, hey, we won't take as much. We'll take a lot less just to be there. So those three schools are actually pretty much playing in the ACC for the next 7 to 10 years for free, just to be a part of a major conference. What happens to those schools if that contract gets broken?
Mm-hmm. Gosh. Complex thing.
and Faith was sitting there like, wow, I didn't even know this was going on.
I didn't.
Oh, it's quite major.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about Groundhog Day, which is today.
All right.